I think we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to just first check if I'm not muted. No, I'm not. So that's good. We can continue. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Messina Lorette Nyubahiriza. I am a knowledge broker, programming and practice at the Knowledge Platform Security and Rule of Law. I want to welcome you all to this webinar on real-time evaluation methodology for learning, taking place today, September 23rd, 2020. Before we get started, I want to go over just a few housekeeping rules. First of all, during this webinar, we would like to have all microphones attendees muted. If you are having any technical issue during the webinar, please use the chat feature to send a message, and we will try to address your question as soon as possible. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly, but neither participants list nor the chat box are being recorded. Out of respect to all in the room, we would like to ask you to write your name and organization in the chat. This will not be recorded, but will allow everyone to get a sense of who else is here. Please be also aware that during the Q&A session, if you wish to ask your question directly to the presenters, your name and voice will be recorded. But there is also an option to submit your written question in the chat. More instructions will be provided just before the beginning of the Q&A part. This webinar is part of the Addressing Root Causes Global Learning Online series, aiming to strengthen relations among our grantees and create connections, linkages across ARC projects and beyond. Just by way of introduction and to contextualize, the Addressing Root Causes Fund is aimed at tackling the root causes of armed conflict, instability, and irregular migration. In total, 19 ARC program partner organizations are working on 21 programs in 12 countries for a 5-year period. The Knowledge Platform, as a vital platform for the generation, sharing, and use of knowledge in the security and rule of law field, is committed to supporting the grantee organization and the MFA to learn from and share programmatic knowledge and use this to improve future programming. The Global Learning Online series, as part of which this webinar is happening, aims to create channels to engage with pertinent issues of learning and explore pathways for collaborative and creative action in learning for a better knowledge uptake in both programming and policy. It's also worth recalling that the ARC global community and its partners gathered in Addis Ababa last March for an ARC regional learning symposium, and as one of the key actions, participants agreed to share best practices across the different programs and beyond the ARC community via different channels. This webinar falls within that line of thought. The webinar is co-hosted by the Knowledge Platform and Oxfam Novib, as already mentioned, and features Oxfam Novib skill lessons on real-time evaluation conducted as part of its ARC Nyubahiriza program in Burundi. In volatile and fragile settings, political and security context makes reliable data collection extremely difficult and complicated. Real-time evaluation methodology was born out of the need to gather information quickly prior to or amidst an emergency response. It is therefore a shorter and less rigorous evaluation, seeking to provide immediate feedback from the field, followed by immediate adaptation and improvement. Drawing from real-time evaluation experience of ARC Nyubahiriza program in Burundi, we would like to use the next hour to discuss the usefulness of conducting real-time evaluations, when to use it, how it works, highlight the challenges that come with conducting that specific type of evaluation, and present real-time evaluation as a tool for learning action. I would like now to introduce our today's speakers, who are both from Oxfam Novib. Lauren Burrows, Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Advisor, Conflict and Fragility at Oxfam Novib, based in The Hague. And Bonaventure Nzisabira, Planning, Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Officer at Oxfam Novib, based in Bujumbura. The webinar will be facilitated by Megan Price, Knowledge Platform Head of Secretariat, and myself. Lauren, feel free to take it from here.
Great, thanks so much, Messina, and it's really nice to see all of you here. Just a quick introduction on my side then. So my name's Lauren. I've been working for Oxfam on MEL for the past year, particularly on the ARC program. Prior to that, I worked on conflict and fragile MEL in lots of different countries around the world, so bringing a lot of other experiences into this discussion as well. And really keen just to generate a sense of discussion and learning in this session so we can pick up the knowledge platforms, real mantra of bringing us all together, and in particular on MEL. So it's really nice to see you all. Before we start, I'll share a presentation, but Bona, I don't know if you want to just quickly introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Lauren. My name is Bonaventure Nzisabira. I'm a MEL officer here at Oxfam Novib Burundi, and I worked the program since the start of program Nyubahiriza. Yes.
Great, thanks, Bona. I will also just share the results of the poll. I know you just filled in on your way in, so it's really great to see that we all want to teleport ourselves, and I'm wondering where exactly that is. So good to see mind reading and flying there as well, but hopefully we can use our superpowers for MEL in this discussion. I will just share my screen and the PowerPoint, so just give me 1 second. Hopefully you can all see that, but let me know if there are any issues. All good. Great. So as Messina has already sort of introduced, we're going to talk a bit about a real-time evaluation that we've done recently in Oxfam and share our learnings with you today. But before I really get into the real-time evaluation, I wanted to just quickly reflect a little bit on how MEL has evolved over the past couple of years to integrate adaptive management. And really how we've taken a less rigid approach with MEL over the past couple of years, and how our donors and the Dutch Ministry have really enabled us to get to the point where we can conduct a real-time evaluation. What you'll see here is the New Humanitarian, which is a newspaper, an online newspaper for the humanitarian sector, recently did an analysis of buzzwords that were used in reports on Relief Web since 1996. So you'll see here a number of graphs that show really the evolution of some of these buzzwords. So for example, we see innovation gradually climbing recently, localization getting quite picking up in 2015, and then we've got migration sort of picking up in the use of terminology over time. Things like COVID, unexpected, as we might expect, just completely shot up in our reports in the past couple of months. And I think for me as a MEL expert, and for a lot of us working in MEL, MEL is something that kind of sits behind all of this and has had to evolve with the use of some of this terminology and some of these new concepts. So for example, with inclusion and with digital, we've really sort of involved MEL to incorporate more digital elements or be more inclusive in our participatory methodology. So I really want to just reflect a moment about how MEL has evolved. And you'll see adaptive management is not included in this, but I imagine it might follow the same trends as gender or data and really picking up again over the last few years. So yeah, I really just wanted to reflect a little bit on that. Now I'd really like us to move back to Burundi, and I'm going to hand over to Bonaventure, who'll give us a bit of a context on the background of the project itself.
Thank you, Lauren. Let me present you the place where Nyubahiriza program was implemented in Burundi. I think not everyone here who knows the history of Burundi, even there are some. Burundi is one of countries of the East African community. It is bordered by Rwanda to the north, Tanzania to the east, and the Democratic Republic of Congo to the west. And as you know, the capital cities are Gitega and Bujumbura. Burundi also is one of the world's poorest nations, and total population is 11 million. Burundi also is still struggling to emerge from 12 years ethnic-based civil war between Hutu and Tutsi. Also, Burundi marked by poverty, insecurity, authoritarian rule, and identity politics. Burundi, violence, human rights abuses, and the repression persist across the country. And as you know, civic space here is virtually closed with restrictions on NGOs. Rorin, could you continue? Okay. Let me also present you the project, Nyubahiriza project. As you know, the Nyubahiriza program was developed in response to a call for tenders launched by Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs as part of fund called Addressing Root Causes of Conflict, ARC. In Kirundi, it's called Nyubahiriza, in English, respect me. We have 7 NGO local partners and 3 international organizations, Oxfam Burundi, the Lead, CARE, and Impunity Watch. The objective is to support to 210,000 men, women, and youth in 70 local communities in the 3 provinces and in 3 also areas. The first area is to build the bridges in divided community with community-based confidence building measures through peace clubs. The second one is to increase socioeconomic resilience for youth against political and identity-based manipulation through jobs loans for youth. And the last one is the transitional justice to introduce peaceful ways to deal with the past through community-based dialogue also with authorities. Thank you. This is the summary of our TOC, of our theory of change. We have 2 big areas, 2 big ARC research areas, human security, functional rule of law, but we work on 3 outcomes. And outcome 1, the program is focusing on collaboration among citizens and between citizens and the state to promote peace and security for all Burundians. The hypothesis is that if authorities, citizens, and the community structures are equipped with a better understanding about their rights and responsibilities as per Burundian law, they can engage in the constructive process of collective addressing security and the violence from community level upwards. And outcome 2 is about to support youth to be able to recognize political and identity-based manipulation towards the recruitment into armed group or other violent behavior. In this outcome, the hypothesis is that if youth are equipped with knowledge and understanding of how they are manipulated by politicians to commit violence, have increased capacity to collectively respond to instrumentalization with the peer and are provided with non-violence livelihood alternative, they are more likely to reject the violence and join armed group with no longer be an attractive option. The third one, transitional justice, to introduce the peace ways to deal with the past through community-based dialogue, also with authorities. The assumption, the hypothesis of this one is that if At the local level, communities begin to deal with the past and with individual or collective memories at the same time as they are equipped to meaningfully engage in genuine national level TG process. This will have a norm setting function reaching across age, gender, and ethnic identity for social reconstruction. This is the summary of our theory of change. Could you move to... Okay. In our 4 years of implementation of our Nyubahiriza program, we have faced some key challenges, and we have identified 4 challenges. The first one is about political violence and manipulation. We had also to answer some questions in the implementation of our project. The first one is how to address politically sensitive issues, including root causes amid repression and violence. The second one is about shirking civic space, how to implement activities when partners have less room to maneuver. The third one, data validity in monitoring and evaluation. How to assess peace, security, and transitional justice when state destruction and insecurity hamper reliable data collection. And the last one is about sustainability, how to sustain project achievement at local level when at the national level, the political climate is not conducive to addressing root causes. Okay, for now, I can share with you some strengths and the challenges with our mail framework. First strength is some degrees of flexibility. Our mail framework, we had the opportunity to add, to remove, or to adapt some indicators. Our mail framework is very detailed with links with ARC common monitoring framework. And the first challenge is the capacity to implement. The second, intersecting conflict sensitivity. And the last one, our indicators are more quantitative than qualitative.
Thanks, Bona. So it's really against this backdrop that Bona has set for us in terms of the challenges that we face in Burundi, our current mail framework, that we decided that we really needed to conduct a rapid data collection process. And so we decided to use a real-time evaluation. Now, this is actually a methodology that already, to some degree, exists in the humanitarian element. So in the humanitarian work, disaster risk reduction, within the clusters, there's a lot of rapid review and data collection anyway. So we really took what was already in use from a humanitarian perspective and adapted it to working in peace building and conflict affected countries. So as you may already know, it's a shorter, less rigorous evaluation. It's really for that immediate feedback from the field so we can adapt in real time. And as I said, in the humanitarian sector, it's usually a methodology that's used in response to a change in context. So we used it rather to not necessarily be a change in context in response to, but rather predicting that something was coming. And what that really was for us was the elections that were about to sort of impact our project, potentially upturn some of our outcomes. So it was really in response to the elections that we decided to do this. In more detail, why did we do it? So as I said, we really wanted to get some early insights into how the elections may intersect with our outcomes. So as this project started, 4 or 5 years ago, we were coming to the end. We knew that this sort of contextual event may actually disrupt some of our outcomes, may impact our sustainability. And we wanted to really capture at a specific point in time before they happened, what we'd achieved. We also anticipated that, as we saw in 2015, there may be violence. So to that degree, we had to plan ahead. This is really a sort of proactive mail response rather than reactive. So we thought the final evaluation we had planned might not go ahead because of security issues, because of access to the field. So to this end, the RTE was really to give us a bit of scope for our final evaluation and really sort of planning ahead to what we may not be able to access in a few months' time. And then finally, we used it to just capture real-time learning, what's going on, what do we need to adapt in our final months. And I think this is a really important point in terms of adaptive management. Programming doesn't need to happen right at the beginning or in the middle. It can also happen towards the end when we recognize that as Oxfam, we may be moving out, we may be leaving, but our partners will remain. And therefore that information is important for them to continue and sustain the work that's been going on. So this is really a bit of background on why we decided to do this. I'm going to hand back to Bona, who's going to give you a bit more of an insight into how we went about it. So we've talked a bit about the what it is, the why we decided to do it. And Bona's going to give you a bit more insight from the field and exactly the approach that we took. Back to you, Bona.
Thank you, Lauren. How did we do real-time evaluation? We do it in 4 phases. First one, to design, training, data collection, analysis. First of all, we created evaluation questions. And the second, we had to design a shorter quantitative survey using Kobo Collect. Our questions are targeted at sustainability and the gaps. That's the second one. The third, we designed qualitative story of change survey that complement and allow us to capture any change. About training, all participants had been trained to a conflict sensitivity, and we had the same understanding of everything, the survey terminology with all our data collectors. And in the field, the data collection took 2 weeks, non-stop, 2 weeks non-stop. And about analysis, it was about quick, targeted, and triangulated analysis. The analysis must feed into our Excel strategy, and they help us to focus on our final evaluation. And we shared everything with the BBP consortium about data triangulation. We shared everything, every document with other consortium, at the ARC Burundi consortium, the BBP consortium. Thank you. What is the perspective from our data collectors from the field? The data collectors' perspective of our real-time evaluation, there is some advantages and the challenges. They told us that real-time evaluation is easy to implement, question are simple and easy to ask, and the respondents are comfortable answering. The second advantage, sometimes the result framework is limited compared to the information from the field, but they told us that real-time evaluation captures as much qualitative and quantitative information. They told us also that real-time evaluation, it is a participatory methodology. Everything is planned together from the start. Some challenges, real-time evaluation is too fast, a lot of information to collect, query, and quantity, and that may tire the respondent. The second one is that the real-time evaluation requires sufficient knowledge about the project. Difficult for the new data collectors. You have to use the same data collectors since the beginning. It is an advisor if you want to conduct real-time evaluation with external persons. Also, the last one, many partners were used to the baseline, midterm review, and the final evaluation. And it was difficult to understanding because RTE was a new concept for them. We have to take a big time to explain everything. That is some challenges and advantages. Yes.
Great, thanks, Bona. So I think just to stress, what was quite unique about this real-time evaluation is not only were we capturing the outcomes of our project before the elections, but also COVID intersected with our planning for this. And suddenly we were capturing a point in time or a snapshot where it was pre-elections, pre-COVID, and then we had quite a nice sort of baseline, pre-elections, pre-COVID, post-elections, maybe not post-COVID, but it was really quite a unique snapshot that we hadn't really anticipated would intersect with COVID as well. So really, thanks so much for that sort of operational background, Bona. So I'm moving on now just to talk a little bit about our top line findings. So based on this RTE, this quick snapshot, we captured a number of signs of sustainability and resilience. So really areas where we could see that despite elections, despite COVID, there was already some personal, strong commitment building in the communities. So for example, many Peace Club members said that they would continue their role after the project, and they were very committed to do so. Many local authorities were pretty positive and consistent. They wanted to continue participating in training awareness. And we really, thought a lot about the local authorities and that they might change if the elections come. They might be significantly impacted in this project. So let's see what it is that they feel is sustainable and resilient within this project. Another component that Bona mentioned was our VSLAs, which are our village saving loan associations. And many of them over 4 years have seen real significant change in their household finances, food security and income in the past 6 months. So again, there was sort of a strong sense of things have changed and may have the resilience to overcome what was ahead. And finally, the VSLAs also sort of started to legitimize relationships in money and business. And we'd seen previously that when it was related to money and business, there was a bit of conflict between neighbours, communities. So actually VSLAs gave a way of legitimizing those relationships and cementing them in a much more constructive manner. And this is mentioned quite frequently by people in the RTE, which was a positive sign. But counter to that, we also wanted to look at signs of things that may affect the sustainability of these outcomes. And we were looking for those sort of cracks that the elections or COVID might start to get into so we could reinforce some of these areas in our final 8 months of the project. Training and awareness was obviously brought up as a positive element, but sometimes an overdependence on champions and role models. So to what degree they would remain as key champions and role models within the project was really something we wanted to strengthen with our local partners. There were quite a few concerned about sustained capacity to keep businesses going, and especially because COVID started to intersect with this. So this is an area that we really had to think about. We need to strengthen this in the last few months of the project. And then we saw a lot of positivity when it came to household level shifts in norms and attitudes. And this was particularly around the household relationships between the man and the woman, changing gender norms. But to what extent these are translatable to the community resilience wasn't as obvious. And again, something we really needed to pick up and strengthen. So what did we do about this information? So our RTE has enabled us to realign with our partners on these findings. So we can see that there are gaps here and there are gaps in terms of the VSLAs or with our households. So then reworking with the partners to make sure that we can strengthen the exit strategy, we can include our findings in it, plan for capitalization workshops with focus on more of this training that they're requesting, increasingly connect our VSLA members with microfinance institutions so we can really cement sustainability beyond the project. Where they were saying that they were worried that COVID might affect their businesses, let's then spend the last 6 months reconnecting them with microfinance institutions. And then really taking this information and this research and embedding it in our final report in some deeper analysis, connecting it to our baseline and our midterms, and then working with BBB, who are another consortium in country, triangulating our data and working to make sure that we can actually use this. So again, the RTE was just a snapshot in time, but it really allowed us to adapt our program ahead of the elections, really start to see where we could strengthen those weaknesses in those areas that we anticipated or didn't, as the case may be. So 5 final takeaways from doing this real-time evaluation that I'd really like you to take away with you. The first one is on flexibility. So the reason that we were sort of able to do this is we started to really cement in conflict and power analysis into our MEL. And we did that in our training and in parts building up to the real-time analysis, real-time evaluation. But in hindsight, embedding that in the design stage would have allowed us to respond at all parts of the 5 years where context intersected with our outcomes or intersected with our MEL framework. So really tying together that conflict and power analysis with MEL, at what point does that information feed into your ability to collect data, and when you should collect data is something that we think we would use in future proposal development. Secondly, finding a balance. So the thing with the real-time evaluation and any rapid data collection is you're getting in quickly, you're gathering information, but to some degree, you're also having to sort of let go a bit of the methodological rigor. So not necessarily going in with good sampling or really, really good, strong methodology. You have to balance it with the need to, I need information to adapt, but I also want it to be high quality. So finding a balance of those 2 areas, I think, is really important when it comes to adaptive programming. Third, triangulation. So something we really benefited from in the Burundi ARC program is working with the BBB consortium to validate our data. So when it comes to the real-time evaluation, we've got 2 consortiums using the same data sets and coming together to say, okay, did you also find this? And so we're just sort of thinking a bit more outside of our own ARC and Oxfam bubble and finding different ways to validate what we find is the right data or the best quality data. Fourth is on capacity. So me and Bona have both sort of reflected on our data collectors' positioning within this evaluation, particularly because they carry a huge importance in terms of the conduit between the communities and the information we receive. And we think that having them involved in the baseline, the midterm, and the end line has allowed them to get to know the project better, which means they're able to ask the questions and understand the kind of questions that we want to ask our communities. So really embedding them in the MEL process has meant that we could really quickly get to the field and use our surveys and talk to communities. And then finally, sort of trust building has come up within this RT quite a lot. And I think don't underestimate the importance of trust building. I think within our ARC consortium, we've seen as the project has built up, trust building has increased. We talk to each other more honestly. Communication is much better. We have really good relations between all parts of the consortium. And then that means when you need to quickly gather some data or understand what's going on in the community, everyone's ready to respond because we all have a better understanding of each other and have a greater trust. So for me, that's also a really key part in that we were able to quickly get into the community, quickly talk to them. So these are the 5 things I think we've really learned in implementing this RTE. And then finally, what I would like to mention is we did the ARC learning event in March. I think Messina already mentioned this. And we also started talking about adaptive management when lots of ARC consortiums came together in March. And we had a couple of questions that we thought the RTE started to answer, but some things that we'd also like to widen the discussion on adaptive management, not just within Oxfam, but with other ARC consortiums and everyone else within within this call or in other webinars. So I'd just like to read some of these questions and considerations that we brought up in our learning event, really just to get us thinking about how we can use adaptive management better in now. So how do we measure adaptive impact? How do we capture formal and informal adaptive programming? The RTE was quite a formal example of adaptive programming, but there are obviously lots of informal changes happening that we're not quite capturing. How can adaptive management be built into projects to not become an extra effort? And I think with the RTE, we've really started to learn about how to embed our data collectors, how to triangulate data so that it doesn't become an extra effort. Things like contingency MEL and scenario mapping. This RTE was a bit of a contingency MEL in that we quickly needed to get data, but how do we sort of embed contingency MEL in our design and our proposal development, and is it necessary? And then really having some overall guidelines on adaptive programming. I think to some degree it's systemizing it, but then also making sure that within the different contexts we work in, that we know really what that means in practice, examples, tools, these kinds of things. So yeah, this is something I'd really like us to discuss if we have time. And that's it from me and Bona. So I'd really like to hear any feedback or any questions from the floor. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lauren and Bonaventure, for this, I would say, comprehensive picture of the context within which you conducted the real-time evaluation, but also the different aspects of the methodology, the challenges, and the key findings. I think this really triggers some concrete and specific questions as to how, you know, in practice, and how in a concrete manner do you build from the onset of the program that flexibility? How do you create that balance between a methodological rigor, but also making sure that the methodology or the procedure to be used is not too heavy? How do you build, you know, capacity? How do you create that trust building? So this definitely triggers, I believe, a lot of questions and probably comments. This is why I'm gonna hand over to Megan, who will facilitate the second part of this conversation. And yeah, Megan, please feel free to take it from here.
Thank you, Messina, and thank you very much, both Bona and Lauren, for the presentation. A lot of information to absorb in that. So from here, we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit. I'd like to see those of you who have been able to join us, and we're excited to have so many here, to move from kind of your passive mode of receiving the information to a more active position, a more active footing, and start coming up with your own questions and ideas and comments that you might want to pose to our colleagues here. This is exactly what we like to try and facilitate here at the Knowledge Platform, is the opportunity for programs to learn from one another, to collaborate, to share ideas, to share lessons. So this is the exact environment to do that. I'm going to give you two options for being able to engage in the conversation. One is simply that you raise your hand. To raise your hand, you just kick open the participants list, and at the bottom of that list, there's a little icon to raise your hand. When I see that in the participants list that your hand is raised, I will call on you, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and speak your question aloud. Please do remember that if you speak your question aloud, your voice will be recorded and taken up in the recording. If you would prefer to submit your question anonymously, that's also perfectly acceptable, and for whatever reason, you don't need to justify that. What you can do is then simply write to me in the chat. So if you write, if you go to the chat, you have the option to click on an individual. So you can click Megan Price, and I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself. I'm the head of the Knowledge Platform for Security and Rule of Law. So apologize for, I always forget to do that. So go ahead and submit any questions you might have to me directly, and then we can draw, and I will read your question aloud, and we don't need to reveal from whom the question was issued. So we're going to kick it off from there. We have just about, I would say, just about 15 minutes to get the conversation going. And like I said, once again, this is your opportunity to also share what you've learned in your experiences from other organizations, from other MEL processes, rapid evaluation processes that you might think are important to share with the group. Lauren, I'm going to kick off with a question that I myself was kind of thinking about and pondering while you were speaking, while you and Bona were presenting. You, in your takeaways there at the end, you kind of indicated the importance of capturing adapted impact, and I want to dig into that a little bit more, because I think oftentimes there's some critiques, let's say, of the importance of, you know, are we just looking at ourselves? Are we navel gazing in all of this? Are we just evaluating our own processes and our own ideas? Or are we keeping the eye on the ball? Are we looking at real impact? So can you help me understand a little bit more about what's the value of how you measure adapted impact? And can you maybe explain to me a little bit more what is adapted impact in your eyes?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I was reflecting on this myself a bit, and that maybe it's not adaptive impact, but maybe it's did we adapt our program to get to a specific outcome and impact? And we need to know what that adaptation was so we can learn how we got to that outcome and impact. So, I mean, maybe it's just a case of really capturing at what point adaptive management on that chain enabled us to get to that outcome, rather than we just see the end product and we celebrate getting to the end product, if you see what I mean. So that would be sort of my reflection back to you. But in some ways, you know, you raise a specific point in that, are we just trying to capture everything as well, rather than, you know, do we need to capture everything that we know to get to the end point? And are we just taking NEL to the extreme when it comes to adaptive management as well, and getting very into everything we need to measure again? So yeah, no answers, maybe more questions.
No, but thanks. It does help me understand a little bit more of the value of saying, not only is it good that we know that we've reached our goal, but that we actually know what contributed to helping us reach our goal. I think that that's a really important insight. And maybe I know that we do have some of our colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and specifically from accountability offices. So if any of them want to weigh in on how much you guys evaluate, or how much you guys, I should say, value seeing that kind of information and reporting back, whether or not that's something that you guys also find useful. I do see that Stefano Consiglio has raised your hand. So Stefano, please go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your questions.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this very interesting webinar. I'm Stefano Consiglio. I work for the International Development Law Organization. We're also gearing towards adaptive project management recently, and prior to joining IDLO, I used to work for IFAD in Rwanda and Tanzania. And there also we followed this kind of adaptive project management approach with constant supervision missions. So my question is, real-time evaluation, of course you get important data that you need in order to also see what's your impact, what's your outcomes. But based on the findings, are you going to actually work also on reviewing or updating your TOC and results framework? And in addition to that, do you think that based on your findings and given that you're going to be able to assess what is working well and what is not, it is useful and helpful to have also, especially since you were working in a consortium, a list of agreed actions that you can take up for subsequent implementation? And the last question is, how often would you suggest to do this? Normally, we're structuring this in terms of, we do the baseline, we do a midterm, and then we do a final assessment. There is also a discussion of doing this periodically, like with some learning sessions, workshops that are done on an annual basis. So what would be your recommendation? Over. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. I'm trying to remember them all. But no, we'll start with the first. So for us, because we are actually coming to the last 6 months of our project, it was actually less about adapting the TOC and more about the usability of the data to inform our exit strategy and sustainability of the project. So in this instance, we will not be updating our TOC, but rather creating that set of recommendations, as you say, to give to our other consortium partners who will remain in Burundi after we've left, so that then they can potentially continue the activities. You know, bearing in mind that you know, we as Oxfam up here in HQ or whatever, and in the country office, can provide advice on sustainability, but at the end of the day, we want those recommendations to be for our local partners. So that is perhaps the usability of it versus the TOC element. One of your other questions was on how frequently we should do this, and it's a great question. And I think, again, we need to balance the extra effort element of NEL. So, you know, if we start doing this 2 or 3 times a year, suddenly we've got evaluations and data coming, you know, from everywhere. And something we tried to do at the start of this RTE was kind of assess what data we already had. I mean, again, that takes a lot of effort from our MEL officers like Bona. Where are the gaps? Do we really need this evaluation? To then determine, should we go in or not? So for me, it's also about assessing the context. So if I see a major political event like an election, then I might go in because I foresee some changes. But if I don't, then, you know, I'd probably have a bit of a way up assessment of, is it worth it? Do I need that data? But yeah, I think you had another question. I'm not sure what, did I miss it?
No, I think you addressed everything. You spoke also
right.
about the recommendations.
Yeah.
Thank
great.
you.
Does Bona, did you have anything to add to that? Sorry, I realize I'm speaking a lot.
You can go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, well, that's it from me.
Excellent. No,
Hello.
thanks. I do see that Johan Tevelde has got his hand up. So if you were ready for the next question, Johan, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak your question.
Yes, my name is Johan Tevelde, and I was also happy to be of that this session, this webinar is organized, and I'm very interested. My involvement, I am a consultant, and I am involved in the other Burundi ARC program. So I did the baseline and the midterm review of that project. So it is very interesting for me to hear. From our the baseline and from the midterm review, we noticed that there is a bias in gathering data. Actually, we compared data at the time, I remember, and we had both similar conclusions in that respect. So there is a bias that people say we are very poor, and in the expectation that if you say you're very poor, you get better, you get probably you anticipate getting better humanitarian aid. That's one bias. The other bias is politically related to the elections. You're careful. We don't need to elaborate on the Burundian context, but okay, it's better to be a bit careful. So you don't criticize authorities, etc. So now my question is this RTA, is it in some way a solution to these problems?
That's a big question. Is it a solution? Wow. I mean, I wish I could say yes, I found a solution. But no, it's a really great question. And the bias element was something that we had in the back of our mind because of the baseline, because of the midterm review and everything that you mentioned. And I think that's why we really started to pick up again on the triangulation of having BBB in our training, having it with our data, just to make sure we had that element covered to some degree as possible, you know. But also making sure the data collectors we had with us at the baseline and the midline also came with us, so they could perhaps have a greater familiarity in flagging what they thought wasn't true and using them really as a conduit of, is this bias, do you think it's true, and not recognizing they also come with their own biases and their own power dynamics, but you know, we can't really do everything. But I'd be interested also, Bona, whether you have any points on this from your perspective on the biases.
Yes, I think yes, as you said, because we developed some strategies because in the baseline and the midterm review, we developed strategies, but in RTE we developed other strategies in order to collect the good results. For example, not to use authorities as a local guide. Other thing, not also to use audios in order to collect the data. That is, we learn with baseline and the midterm review, and we adapt the methodology. That is why I can say that the real-time evaluation can be a solution for data bias. Yes.
Thank you.
I'd also be interested, maybe, Johanna, maybe this is a question to the knowledge platform, to maybe address this as a wider research question. You know, how do you address the biases in MEL and in our practices, you know, and maybe open that for further discussion at some point.
Yeah, I think that's it's definitely a topic that I think a lot of people are struggling with, so there could be great value of gathering more information and understanding about that. It also reminds me, Lauren, your mention of the enumerators. You did ask to create a poll about how many in this room used enumerators and data collection in your MEL, or sorry, your MEL frameworks. Is maybe now a time to kind of launch that poll and see if other people, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so we've asked everyone to go ahead and see how many of the group actually do use data collectors, local data collectors in gathering their MEL data, and that kind of maybe gives us an insight into whether or not understanding their role as let's say, nuancers or analyzers of the data that they are collecting. And I think that lends itself to the participatory approach that you and specifically Bona was referring to, whether or not their role can be leveraged there well. So yeah, it looks, at the moment, we've only got 5 people answering the survey. So if you guys want to give some more input, that would be helpful for us to understand the role that enumerators play in programming. I'm going to leave it open for another minute. I'm going to move also to another question that's popped up, and it actually relates quite closely to this. You've mentioned a couple of times the value of triangulation. And I wanted to hear from you a little bit also because understanding the nature of RTE, it happens maybe a little bit more spontaneously. What are ways in which it's important for you to establish relationships and perhaps learning relationships specifically with other organizations so that you can have that trust to kind of be able to share spontaneously collected data that might be a bit rough, so that you can do such triangulation? And how do you build that collaboration? Because that would, I imagine, involve not only coordination, but some trust as well. And do others see the value of triangulating their data with yours?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think, I mean, I wasn't there so much at the beginning in terms of establishing these relationships, so maybe Bona can speak more to that. But I do think there is just so much value in having that trust to know that, you know, please look at my data, I'll look at your data, and we'll coordinate on those answers. And I think, you know, historically, NGOs have been very much, this is my data, I don't want anyone to, you know, look at it, I'm not sure if it's concrete enough. And so that kind of openness and that kind of transition in Mel, I think, is really important and has happened more or less for us over the past couple of years. But also, perhaps we need to also remember the secondary resources, the open source data that's actually started to become more accessible. You know, you've got OpenStreetMaps, satellite imagery, other cluster data. You know, let's also bring that into our analysis a bit more and triangulate not just with other consortia, but other online free source data that, you know, many people are contributing to all over the world. And it's maybe more of a snapshot of people's public perceptions, but also are valuable. Yeah, Bona? Bona, do you have something to say on the relationship building and triangulation?
Yes, I share with you what you said. I don't have other thing to add.
Thanks.
Great, okay. Well, it looks about, we've got kind of a 50-50. Well, no, actually, I should say we've got like a 90-10 in terms of the split on whether or not people use an enumerator. So 40% use them sometimes, which you could also understand to be yes. 50% absolutely use them, and only one person reported that they don't really use them. So no, that's interesting as well, and it should be considered in terms of how does that affect the data. I'm looking, I don't see any hands at the moment, so please be aware that this is also an open discussion, so those of you who have comments or questions, feel free to interject those as they come up. I'm going to touch on something else that you mentioned in your presentation that I think is perhaps important also to those who sit more on the accountability side of things. You mentioned, obviously, with kind of the more spontaneous and rapid way in which these evaluations are carried out, the methodology is not as rigorous. So where would you see are the limitations in how this data that is collected could actually be used? Where do you need to draw the line and say, this is not data that we have enough confidence in that we can take it so far along in our decision making, but it is maybe data that we do feel comfortable giving us an insight or helping us point us in the right direction. So how do you square that?
I think, again, I mean, I'm sort of banging on about triangulation, but that's the point when I compare it to BBB's data, for example, or someone else's data, and I see major marginal shifts and major differences that I'm like, you know, okay, there's something really off here. And particularly the rapid element of this means that that's almost my indicator. So therefore, triangulation is almost an absolute necessary if you're rapidly going to collect data. But also, I think, you know, I mean, maybe Bona can speak to this more. You know, you're kind of then also reliant on your data collectors to flag any major trends or anything that they feel just completely isn't right. And again, those two work in a way together to make sure that where we're sort of sacrificing that rigor, that there is at least some confidence in the data that's there. So those two really have to work together for me quite simultaneously to ensure that I'm happy with what I've got in terms of confidence. But at the same time, while this, you know, is a rapid piece of data that you're doing adaptive management for, it's not your only piece of NEL data. You've also got an end-line evaluation coming, or you did a midterm review, or maybe we do, you know, we do outcome harvesting. We do other sorts of data collection in our NEL process. So at the end of the day, we've got other data sources that we hope to bring as a whole. So where we're sacrificing a little bit here, we're making sure other things, randomized controlled trials or whatever else we're using in other projects, does carry that rigor so that there's a balance overall. I mean, it's not perfect by any means, but we work in places that are not perfect, so it's always complex. Yeah, I'm wondering, Bona, if you have any thoughts on that.
It's okay for me.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to move. Oh, I see, Messina, you waving your hand in your window. So go right ahead, please.
Ask, but let me just ask. And it's a tricky one, I guess. When is early enough, Lauren? I know it's a tough one because I know in some contexts, especially ahead of elections, political tensions start to exacerbate quite early, you know, like in the context of Burundi, 2 years before the elections, even more, you know. It's like the field situation is really, really tough, and there are a lot of tensions, and it's, you know, it's already tough to conduct, I would say, reliable data collection. It's tough to navigate the administrative relationship with authorities. But how is early enough? How do you, you know, find the right time and the balance between, well, I think I should, you know, start to plan ahead, but also I shouldn't wait because there is, you know, specific information fresh inside I'm looking to gather. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to answer. A couple of things come to mind. I think for me, early enough is also balancing it with, are my teams safe and able to go to the field safely, and am I not putting them at risk? For me, that's kind of the balance between, you know, something major is happening, where it's the elections, violence potentially may happen. Therefore, I really have to balance that safety and protection of my staff and data collectors. So that may be the tipping point. And obviously that kind of is also reliant on Bona and the staff in the country office to make that assessment, which they're doing all the time anyway. So it's really that risk assessment alongside anything rapid that's really important. But also, I suppose if you're going back to design at the beginning and the proposal development stages, you're also being proactive in taking a, you know, calendar of major events or things that I think might occur in Burundi, putting that against my NEL framework and saying, okay, potentially I may need to do some additional data collection here in a couple of years because an election's happening, or because there's major migration flows happening here. I need to monitor that over the next 6 months and maybe determine if I need to do data collection. So it's almost a balance of like micro national data trends with the realities of my teams on the ground. Yeah, I mean, again, being proactive with NEL, I think, is a bit of a luxury in that when we're in the country offices, we can't always be like that. But if we're monitoring the conflict, we've got that conflict analysis, we've got conflict sensitive indicators, then we're trying to monitor that alongside. So we're doing our best, I suppose, to be a bit more proactive. Yeah.
It might also be a good opportunity. I don't know, Bona, if you have more specific kind of perspective in terms of where you see action being necessary, or perhaps being a little bit too aggressive at given moments, given that you have a better view from kind of the field perspective, from the country's perspective. So would you have any advice for those in the room about when to initiate a rapid evaluation, or when maybe to not put the staff at risk?
Please, could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. And it's more about, from your perspective at the field level, having a lot more of an insight into what tensions are rising, how things are feeling. What kind of signals do you look for to decide whether or not doing rapid evaluation is really important in a given moment, or perhaps too dangerous for enumerators in a given moment? Are there insights that you can share on how you make that decision?
Okay. Thank you. I think in a project which implemented in a fragility context, we know that there are many things in the field, because if we are going to use data collectors, they can be also there are some. If I can express in French, is good. Messina,
I think that's fine.
Go ahead. Very happy to translate.
Ok.
Yeah.
Ok. Bon, j'ai compris que vous posez des questions. Est-ce que utiliser les enquêteurs pour collecter les données dans des contextes fragiles? Est-ce que c'est pas dangereux pour les enquêteurs ou pas? C'est ça? C'est la question?
Oui, c'est ça la question. Tu as bien compris.
Ok. En fait, ici au Burundi, comme dans d'autres contextes fragiles, on sait que vraiment utiliser les enquêteurs, c'est un peu dangereux. Mais pour nous ici, nous avons utilisé les enquêteurs depuis le baseline, les mêmes enquêteurs depuis le baseline, depuis l'évaluation à mi-parcours, et aussi depuis la real-time evaluation. D'abord, les enquêteurs étaient familiers aux questions, au programme. C'était vraiment des enquêteurs qui connaissaient bien la zone d'intervention du programme Nyubahiriza, et certains même des enquêteurs provenaient de ces provinces d'intervention. C'est-à-dire que ce n'était pas vraiment dangereux. Et aussi, le projet a construit quelque chose de vraiment de strong, pas parce que le projet est déjà connu par les autorités locales, et les autorités locales étaient déjà dans des activités du projet, ils participaient dans des formations, et ce n'était pas vraiment du tout dangereux pour les enquêteurs ou pour les autres personnes externes. Voilà.
Okay. So basically, what has been done as part of this project is, first of all, there was, since the very beginning of this project, an investment in terms of strengthening relationship with or let's say investing in capacity building with the same, I would say, the same team of data collectors. So for the baseline, for the midterm review, and for the real-time evaluation, the project officers worked with the same group of data collectors. And they worked with data collectors who really understand, first of all, the project, secondly, the context, both national but also local, and when possible, they have tried to use data collectors from specific areas of intervention, specific provinces, and those were covering the same provinces. And another thing is that they have already also, since the beginning of the project, they have tried to involve, or let's say, secure some understanding from the side of the administrative authorities, which I think is quite key in this context. So administrative authorities knew the project since the beginning, and they were kept in the loop throughout the implementation. And it has been a way of, let's say, sustaining trust between project implementers, data collectors, but also administrative authorities. All that have served to navigate that difficult political climate, and to make sure that their data collectors are not exposed or threatened. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you both. Thank you, Bona, for that really comprehensive answer, and thank you, Messina, for helping the rest of us non-francophone to understand. Excellent. We're winding up on our time now, so I want to be respectful of everyone who's made the time to join the meeting and contribute so generously. With that, I'm going to give just one more minute to see if there are any other questions from the audience, from the participants. I see George. Please go ahead, George.
Let me mute and put my mic on. Thank you so much for this session. It's very interesting to see how real-time evaluation has been working in the Oxfam program, the cooperation also with the BBB program for of Save a Child, and that cooperatively a view is being formed about, you know, the challenges in Burundi. And I see that this real-time evaluation is particularly helpful for programs that are based on adaptive programming, because if you have like regular review of your activities, then indeed you can put more effort on scenario mapping. So what do we think what's going to happen? And that's where basically you are asking for the minimum requirements of, let's say, adaptive programming. But by this real-time evaluation, you'll find very fast, you know, how local authorities, what they're, how they feel about the program, what is possible. But you will also have a close eye, so what's happening in the context, and based on many variables, how the participants are doing, how the local communities are doing, you can come to, you know, a conclusion that you need to adapt the program. And basically, the minimum requirement, how to use it, is basically to go back and to first understand, you know, the dynamics of your program, what are the challenges, and there way you have a feeling that you need to adapt the program in order to get your outcome indicators or outcome targets. You can basically, in my opinion, adapt or make certain adaptations to the program. And the ministry didn't send any guidelines out. It was very difficult to say, okay, in this case you can do it, in that case you cannot do it. But I see a very big value of this system. I have just a few thoughts on it in terms of, you know, what are the minimum standards that you need in terms of capacity. I can imagine that it has quite, it's labor intensive. You need to have a group of people that can actually either locally or at the head office to really understand what is being written. And I can also, and maybe it might also result in certain problems, because if partners are so involved in evaluation, they can also see all types of new opportunities and have a feeling, okay, here and here we need adaptive programming, but it might conflict, for example, to budget or to donor requirements or how the program is built. I wonder how you deal with it. And another thing is, okay, so this is really project specific, and how do you extrapolate it and bring it up to like global level, or how will it be relevant for, you know, programs of Oxfam outside of this program, for example, in other countries? I was just wondering in general, but in terms of the presentation and what is happening, actually, I'm very happy that it is happening, that there's so much attention to evaluation, because that is one of the key drivers to understand how the program is doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, George. Lauren or Bona, do either of you have reflections to share?
Yeah, thanks, George. You raised a really good point on the labor intensive element, and that's why I mentioned the trust building, because it becomes easier if you've got that trust in place, and then sort of the labor intensive element, people are willing to put in the time if they recognize that the value's added and you've already got that built up. And I suppose the idea of it being labor intensive also means you need to have had that capacity strengthening right from the beginning to enable you to quickly go in and do it as well. I'm actually curious, you know, when you mentioned the budget and sort of the restrictions that maybe are already set, how the ministry would respond if I did come back with a real-time evaluation and a set of data and say, actually, we do need to adapt it. Here's evidence and here's proof. Would you be more willing to, you know, stretch and open it if it was perhaps more evidence-based like that? Yeah, I'd be curious.
I can respond to that. Actually, I would be very happy if it would happen, because then you really see the involvement of the lead in the program and that they are dedicated to get the results right. And one of the things that we are struggling with is indeed, you say, how do we do outcome measuring? We go into a new era from like just delivering a program into how does this program make sense in this context? How do we actually not just educate people, but how to change the values, the norms, how you know, an area becomes more human secure? How do people actually get jobs? And in terms to do so, you have to go off the path of that. This is the program. This is how we do it. This is how we decided it, you know, a year ago, because the context is fluent, the political context, but also how the community responds to the program and local authorities respond to the program. And it might as well, for example, in the case of Oxfam in Burundi, that, you know, we have to work on sustainability, and it will not be how it used to be, because maybe in the future, you know, but we need help from other organizations to implement it. And then you can really say, okay, we have to make all these changes in the program. And I'm very happy that we are in close contact with Oxfam in order to discuss these issues. And I think that it is widely carried within the ministry that we are not, I think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands is just very aware of the complexity of certain states in the world where we are particularly are, because it is the way it is. That is an awareness that we have to be flexible in our funding. And I think nowadays we also, you know, educate and train people to have a more thorough look through the program. What are the dynamics? Because if you do not understand the dynamics in the program or country, I don't feel that you're fit for the job. So we will be very, at least I would be very happy to see these changes. Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Excellent. No, thanks. That's a really fruitful and insightful exchange. So thank you guys for both being candid and honest, because that's how we create the value of these meetings. So I want to thank you both for that. I'm aware of the time, so at this point I have one question that I've received anonymously in the chat that I'm going to share, but also Andres, I've seen your hand as well. So Andres, why don't you go ahead with your question, and then after that I will be asking the question that I received anonymously. And then I think from there we'll need to wrap up out of respect for everyone's time. But thank you. Andres, please. Thank you,
Megan. Thank you, Lauren, Messina, and Bona for organizing this great webinar. But just also it's more a comment rather than a question. Also following a little bit what George was mentioning in terms of the value for money for doing such an exercise, which I think is important also to share this with all people in this room, because it's also the balance that you have to make, as Lauren was mentioning, on the kind of information that you will get and how this information will inform actually more the program implementation, particularly on this side, as we did it focusing on sustainability towards the exit, not only thinking that Oxfam, the program is finishing, but also Oxfam Burundi is leaving. So we also took the sustainability part as part of what actually needs to happen to make sure that the results of the program will be sustained. And that is also a little bit of feedback from MOFA, and sometimes in terms of MEL frameworks on reporting structures, is what is actually, how should we balance this? It's actually sometimes more important to really reach to all the particular outcomes of the program, or say actually it's better to work on one or two that will make actually sure that we have the structures in place to be sustained in the longer term. So that's also the comment that I wanted to make in terms of how do we really balance this, and in terms of efficiency and how not really expensive these kind of exercises are. So also wanted to mention that we are more than happy with all the participants, but also Messina with a rather global ARC global learning groups to share this information, to share the methodology, the questions. If any other program will be interested in applying this, we'll be more than happy to share this information with everyone. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Andres, for those encouraging comments as well. I have to correct myself, so I'm going to ask a question that I received anonymously, and then I believe we had someone else who wanted to raise their hand but was struggling to find the way to do that. So I will call, first we'll issue the question that I received anonymously, and then Diomede, after that I will call on you. So just to give you a heads up. So the question I received, and I think it's really good because it touches on what Bona was describing before as the participatory approach of the real-time evaluation. At what level are beneficiaries or communities themselves involved in the data collection and then the different methodologies that are shared? So to what extent is that part of the process, and can that be part of the process when you are moving towards maybe perhaps a very sensitive time and doing it in a rapid way?
Yes, it's a great question. And I think when you're rapidly responding to needing information, there is a degree of, you know, how much can we involve them from a focus group perspective or a feedback mechanism perspective. And we did think about this quite deeply in terms of feedback mechanisms. So we're collecting these data and we do want to make sure it goes back in a way that is useful. So what we decided is that because the final evaluation was meant to happen after the elections was in process, that we would feed back the information from the real-time evaluation in our final evaluation. So we'd put aside additional time to make sure that any data that we got from the real-time evaluation in terms of interpretation or validation was included in our final evaluation data collection process to then kind of evolve it together. We're still yet to think about the major logistics of that, but because the elections were also there in the middle in terms of protection, in terms of safety, in terms of being able to feedback directly, I mean, it's a major male dilemma in terms of having that two-way street. And I think this is where COBO and new technologies are kind of evolving for us in a way. So it wasn't something we were able to rapidly, you know, implement a new app or anything like that, but definitely, yeah, something that was on our mind. Bona, I don't know if you had any additional points on that.
It's good for me.
Okay.
Okay.
No, thanks. So I'm going to now call, I don't see this individual, but Diomede, if you can make yourself heard by unmuting yourself, and then you said that you had some reflections to share also about the limitations that RTE imposes and how we need to navigate those as well.
Okay, I think, okay, thank you again for this. I just want to share the one question you asked to Bona and Lauren regarding the limits for real-time evaluations. I just want to share my experience on this because I was here in the field. Then I think one of course, the context of real-time evaluation to do where, of course, you think that crisis or election period, according to Burundi, was a good thing. But I think this thing you need to think before maybe 1 year before election, maybe just in the Burundi context. Because if you analyze if you do real-time evaluation when election come in only 5 minutes, people are not open to talk about peace and security. So I think in the coming days or in coming time, it will be better to think it before. Of course, I understand the philosophy of real-time evaluation, but also according to Burundi culture, for instance, people are not open to give the opinion when they think they can have risk. So I think one of the limits was also there because the collectors was afraid to ask deeply questions related to peace and security or conflict in the community. Even for the second the true thematic regarding impunity, regarding justice, transition justice, I think we didn't receive more information regarding of transition justice, because even now, if you analyze what happened after election, because if you analyze the report, suppose now it's okay, people live in peace, but now when you see how how we live, how now some youth of Senel, one of political party opposition, is arrested, even how people continue to be killed. So it means that even they give some responses, it not means it is really, it is reality. This is also one of the limits of this real-time evaluation. So second question, I think Andres was already give some questions about perspective, how we think we can more be proactive and then be sure that it is reasonable. So for now, we are trying to implement exit strategy, where we think that we need more involve some local structures like Abatanga Mucho, like Peace Club of Peace, Peace Club of Peace, and also some document related to what we call PCDC, plan of the local development. So we are trying to more involve the people, involve our local structures to take the ownership and to be sure that after Nyubahiriza, the club piece will continue to work. After Nyubahiriza also, Abatanga Mucho role models, of course, will continue. After also a piece of, will continue to work even after Nyubahiriza. So there are some activities which think that can help the people to be more proactive, more sustainable, more independent than even after Nyubahiriza. This is why even for economic empowerment with village loans, we try now to connect with microfinance, with these groups, to be sure that even if they are not able to continue to save themselves, they can go to the microfinance and ask money to continue to run the business. This is some activity, just to give some insights of activities we're running. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diomede. So yeah, again, I think excellent points made about as time let's say carries towards a particular moment of tension, that obviously will have an impact on the validity of the information that people are able to share with you, as you mentioned earlier as well, but also kind of piggybacking on that dynamic, the need to really understand how those communications and that trust with the community, has their participation in these processes, is also part and parcel of creating sustainability after the project. So really, really important lessons, and thank you, Diomede, for sharing those. I don't know if Lauren or Bona, we are running into time now, so I want to give you guys the opportunity for closing words. So Lauren or Bona, do you have any final thoughts to share with us?
Yeah, nothing major really. I mean, I massively value this discussion, and Dia has some really great points on the validity and the closeness of when these things happen. And I think it's really just about the balance and the usefulness of that information. You know, we have got really good information that will inform our exit strategy to some degree. And I think what George was saying, and Andres, on the value for money as well, there's so many variables here that we're trying to balance to determine, you know, what is it worth it? Are we getting what we need? Do we need to go now or not? And, you know, I think this really speaks to the flexibility of the ARC project, Bona's amazing work in country, Dio's amazing work in country, and Andres, that we can have that flexibility and we can weigh up those variables to do any kind of rapid evaluation. So yeah, just thanks everyone. That's it for me.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, everyone. What I say, I think if you want to adapt the methodology, if you want to feed, if you want to adapt your exit strategy, to build your exit strategy of your program, if you want to really focus on your final evaluation, I advise you to use real-time evaluation, because it helps to adapt many things in the project. Please feel free to contact us. Feel free to we can share you everything, every document. Yes, if you every document, we can share you the methodology that we used. Thank you.
Excellent. That's really generous of you as well, Bona. I am aware that a couple more people have indicated that they have questions, and I am sorry that we are running out of time. Bona and Lauren, would you have maybe just 2 or 3 more minutes, and I can give those who need to leave a graceful opportunity to depart? But we have 1 or 2 more people who still wanted to raise their hand, and I don't want to be over greedy with your time.
Yeah, no, I have 5 more minutes to go.
5 more minutes, okay. For those of you who do have other appointments, we absolutely thank you for your time spending with us, and we bid you adieu now. We will take another final question. Francois, I do invite you to go ahead and ask your question, and we will keep it to just another 5 minutes. And then before you do, Francois, I apologize. Maybe Lauren and Bona, if you would be willing to share your contact details in the chat so that anyone else who might have follow-up questions can issue to those to you directly. Okay, Francois, please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. Thanks for the Oxfam team who are sharing these key findings from real-time evaluation. So I'm from BBB consortium. So firstly, I want to thank Oxfam team who provided the training on real-time evaluation to the BBB staff. And after training, BBB staff implemented this approach. So this we realized that this approach was very helpful for our program, because we tried to evaluate and assess the sustainability of our program through different contexts. So this approach has helped our program to assess and validate the sustainability of our program. So I can say it is an innovative approach, because we tried to triangulate the information from Nyubahiriza program with our data collected using this approach. So we realized that during baseline or midterm, there are some difference in information, but using this approach, we realized that some information are almost the same. So it is a useful approach. And this approach has helped our program to design and review our data collection tool, because there are some tools we are using in a routine, but they don't or didn't collect the information. So this approach has helped to design our tools. Also, Nyubahiriza has used the collectors. For BBB program, we have our staff, field staff. We used our field staff to collect data because they are accustomed to collect data. They have a good relationship with local authorities. So as we are working in a fragile context, sometimes when we bring external collectors, so it takes time to contact our authorities. Also, when it is a research, we must to ask the statistic visa. So for those data, we have used our field staff. So I can conclude that this approach is an innovative approach that perhaps in the future we will use it to assess the sustainability. Also, how we can adapt our program to the reality. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Francois, for those additional reflections, also coming from the consortium part, or the partner at BBB. I think one thing that I'm taking away from this is that relationships are incredibly important in this process. Not only the relationship between the organization and perhaps the data collectors and the enumerators, but also between organizations to be able to share the data. One of the weaknesses, perhaps, of the RTV or RTE approach is that you can't always have the most rigorous data, so being able to share and triangulate becomes all the more important. So it was really, really fascinating to hear about how this approach both relies on, but also can help strengthen these relationships that prove so important. And I want to thank Bona and Lauren specifically for your reflections. To all of those of you here, we still have quite a number of participants still here who've dedicated your time not only to learning and listening, but also to contributing your own insights. It has greatly enriched the discussion. So I want to leave it at that. Lauren and Bona, once again, thank you very much. Messina, I turn it to you for kind of a final send-off and perhaps a survey reminder.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Megan. I just want to thank you all for joining this conversation. The intention was really to draw from a specific real-time evaluation experience in, I would say, a quite complex and volatile environment, and unpack steps in such a process, talk about challenges, highlight specific ways of capitalizing on such a process in terms of planning ahead, adapting, and exiting strategically. And I think our speakers did a great job in sharing concrete insights on how to do that. I would like to thank them very much for their time and for their presentations and for sharing those insights, but also for their commitment to the ARC Global Learning Initiative. Thank you very much all for joining us today. Each of you brought specific expertise, and it has been really enriching to hear from you. I really hope you've also enjoyed the conversation with each other. Just before we end this, we would like to get your feedback on both format and content of this conversation, of this webinar. And I would like to ask you to respond to a short post survey, which I believe has been sent to your email addresses. Thank you in advance for your time and for the feedback you will be willing to share with us. And again, if you would like to co-host an event, a webinar with us, either as part of this ARC Global Learning Initiative or beyond, do not hesitate to reach out to the Secretariat. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Bye.
Thanks so much, Messina and Megan. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next time.